family fleeing a pogrom. I'm very grateful that they successfully made it to the United States, because we wouldn't have Helen and all of the amazing, beautiful music that she has provided for us over the years. A couple of readings for us before we go into our conversation with Anne. Our traditional word today is from Paul's letter to the Philippians. I know what it is to have little, and I know what it is to have plenty. In any and all circumstances, I have learned that the secret of being well-fed and of going hungry and of having plenty and of being in need. And then a contemporary word from the Belgian artist Eric Pevernagi. We are what we are, a handful of dust. And although life remains a temporal enterprise, we recognize we have a mission. Through resilience and empathy, we can take a walk on the path of thought and wonder and brighten up the hazy remains of the day. Resilience, then, is this capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or an inner toughness. It is, as I told our children, how we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and start all over again. F. Scott Fitzgerald is famous for writing that there are no second acts in American lives, and yet each of us in this room or watching from home knows that F. Scott Fitzgerald is wrong on this account. I have known many, if not all of you, to have second, third, even fourth acts. America is a great country in which we can reinvent ourselves. In fact, I would go so far as to say that this American promise, this American dream, is that we get to have as many second chances as we want. Anne Fox is just such a Wichitan. Many of you know Anne from one of her second or third or fourth acts as the executive director of Habitat for Humanity, and many of you have worked building houses side by side there. And she did that for almost a decade. Anne's experiences in nonprofits and in working with volunteers and with the public who often need an example of resilience have allowed her to be an advocate for housing and for volunteerism. I'm thrilled that we have Anne with us this morning for a little soul-soothing conversation about how we humans must be resilient to face the challenges of the day. Please welcome Anne Fox. Fire that up for you so that we can hear your answers. Once again, thank you so much for being here. I was just remembering the first time I met Anne was in the conference room at Habitat. And I'd known her name for a long time. And in the conference room at Habitat for Humanity, there were all these pictures up here on the wall of all these families. And I remember looking and going, oh, these are all of the people that have received and worked for and built these homes, that it was so cool to see, but I was wrong. Those pictures were actually families who were waiting for a home. And I remember how that really struck me, to be sitting in a conference room with all these faces with such hope and dreaming of owning a home. So is that kind of...
That's exactly right, and there's nothing that inspires you more than the folks who are poised and ready to make change in their lives, because that's really what Habitat's about, walking on a path alongside someone who has a goal and a dream and just needs help and tools to get to that goal.
Wonderful.
Very compelling, and there's 24 families on that wall right now, and 20 who are being served this year, so the need for housing, I think, has been great in our world and our community for a long time, but the pandemic just absolutely escalated the visibility of that need.
Okay. Well, let's back up a little bit.
Okay.
How did all this start for you?
Oh my gosh. How far back are we going, Paul?
Are you a Wichitan?
Actually, I grew up in northwest Iowa, far northwest Iowa, on a hog farm. And actually, Danielle, where did you go? Danielle.
Right here.
Oh, Danielle, you're back here. Masks. I
know.
Every family vacation I took as a child was to Minnesota. I thought that vacation meant Minnesota, where we would fish in some, lake with a lot of big mosquitoes. That's what I mostly remember, and I really haven't been back for vacation there since I learned there are other places in the world. I'm the oldest of 7 children, and on a hog farm, that means you learn to work, but because 5 of those 7 were boys, I never got to work on the farm. I got to work feeding the persons who worked on the farm. So I spent a lot of time baking and cooking and gardening and all those things that you do on an Iowa farm. And when it came time to think about graduating from high school, I knew one thing. I knew I didn't want to be a nurse, I didn't want to be a teacher, and I didn't want to be a hog farmer's wife. And those were the 3 options I could see available to me. So I'm a person who reacts more than plans. And I really, through my whole life, have never known what I want to do. But when a call came that sounded right, I've gone for it. So that's probably why I've had a lot of different acts doing a lot of different things. So one of those calls was the first African-American person I ever met in the flesh, came from Newman University in Wichita. Our town didn't have a hotel, so when she came to recruit at the high schools in our area, people had to give up bedrooms and host the recruiters. So my bedroom was always given up because as the oldest girl, I had my own room where everybody else shared. And so she stayed in my room. My little brother wrote a poem about her, wondering who was going to ask the question, "What color are you, Sue?" It was a profound experience in our life. And, that's how I really realize how much the place you come from really shapes who you are and your interpretation of the world. I accepted that recruiter's offer of a scholarship and moved to Wichita in 1977. It's been over 40 years, my goodness, but I remember the day I arrived here because I didn't know a soul, and that was the most freeing thing that ever could happen to a child from a small town in Iowa. Where I always got reported when I bought the cigarettes out of the machine on Main Street. Somebody always called my mother on that one.
But you were buying them for your mother, right?
Oh, no. Anyway.
That's neat.
I studied English at Newman and, again, didn't really know what I wanted to do, but took a job in public relations at St. Francis Hospital. And Mary Ellen, one of the first people I met was Mary Ellen Conley in that environment. But I was asked to direct the volunteer program. And I was a 19-year-old supervising, guiding, assigning 400 people who were 4 times my age, basically, in the hospital environment. And honestly, that was probably the calling that's been the strongest in my life, because I learned in working with volunteers the goodness of the human spirit and the desire to serve others. And I also learned that if you want people to sit and do nothing, you have to pay them. Think about it, surgery waiting room was the one. Nobody ever wanted to do that because you really are just sitting waiting for a doctor to get done and come out, and it's really kind of boring, isn't that true when and in my work since then in supervising people who are paid staff, I've learned the most powerful motivator to someone is when they understand the importance of what they're doing, when you can tie the work to what difference it makes. It doesn't matter how much you pay, it does. But really, when the purpose of the work drives you, you'll do anything. And probably the anything that was strongest at St. Francis, we did those Hemoccult tests where, for a long period of time, finding colon cancer early was a big important thing. And I had people opening feces samples by the thousands. We would get 10,000 of those in the mail a day. Do you remember that, Mary Ellen? You probably stayed far away from the volunteer office at that time. But, volunteers were opening those, logging them, and oh my gosh, it was smelly, horrible work, but the purpose was to help people identify colon cancer early, and we knew in that day how important that was for early detection. So working with volunteers has been the common thread throughout my whole life, because people who are motivated by that purpose are such wonderful folks. And I see from your steeple news and your bulletins. You guys are a people of action and serving others, so that's incredible.
We try. How many of you have worked on a Habitat home? Raise your hand. We're just curious.
Yay!
I thought quite a few. How many of you have been fortunate to be at the sacred moment when they do the little ceremony to turn the keys over to the family? There's nothing like that celebration, is there?
That's
I've been to a few of them, and
moment.
every one of them is just profoundly moving to see these
sure.
people get a home. It's really
Sure.
cool.
In the healthcare environment, things change rapidly, and I ended up becoming a licensed nursing home administrator, and I worked in nursing homes for 25 years. And I would say the age group I love is the elderly. I was blessed to live within 2 miles of my maternal and paternal grandparents, so they were a huge part of my life for all my growing up years. The nursing home environment was an incredible place to live, but it's where I learned again how important the power of the building you're in. And in my years in elder care, we were in the horrible nursing homes that you went to visit your grandparents in, the medical model where the nurses sat in the middle and there were these rows of rooms and they were 110 square feet because that's what the law said was big enough, and you shared with someone you didn't know. It was awful, awful, awful. And the power of our surroundings does so much for our heart, doesn't it? And in the nursing home environment, I really realized that. But I also had a son I have 4 children, and my youngest son is disabled. And thanks for your support of Starkey, he's now a Starkey resident. He's 6'4".
Wow.
His name is AJ, so he can spell it. That really means always joyful, but he's a hoot. I wish you all could meet him, and he thanks you for the things you do to make his life possible. But when I was working in nursing homes, I had dementia patients by day who didn't know what time or day it was, and then I went home, and AJ didn't know what time or day it was, and it was a little crazy making. So I had spent almost $3 million with a general contractor renovating our nursing home, and he said, hey, if you ever want to get out of this business, come work for me. So I did. So for 5 years, I was a commercial general contractor. I learned to build healthcare facilities, which is its own unique entity. And it's like the guy who asked me to do this would always say, why am I teaching you all this stuff? Because then the economy crashed, and
Right.
he really couldn't afford me anymore because I was supposed to be a marketer for his assisted living facilities that he was building. So, why in the world? Well, because then Habitat called. And so I had the weird combination of significant construction skills, albeit in the commercial industry or world, but also with working with volunteers. So, if ever you're called to something, you say, why? Maybe take a listen, because it might be God calling you to something you would not have imagined for yourself. And I never worked as little as when I worked for a for-profit organization, because my boss would say, if you're still at 5, you haven't prioritized your work well enough. I'm not paying for lights past then. And those of you who work in nonprofits know the work never ends and you just never stop. So that was a really remarkable time. Habitat is the capstone of my working life. I believe it is Robert Lupton. Has anybody read anything by Robert Lupton? He wrote Toxic Charity, How Churches Hurt the People They Hope to Help. And if you haven't read that, read it. It wakes you up to a few things that we tend to do when we want to be doing good. And Robert Lupton gives Habitat as one of the examples of a well-designed nonprofit because you're in relationship with the people that you're serving. And so we at Habitat, families are partners. They're not clients or they're not the needy. They are partners. And they are doing the work and we are giving them the tools. And that's very literal, but it's not just the hammer. It's also the education about financial management. It is the awareness of their own ability. So many times with folks who have low financial resources, we focus on what they can't do and what they don't have. And the beauty of Habitat is finding what you do have and what you can do. Man in a wheelchair, obviously couldn't get on a ladder and build his own house, but he was the best darn paintbrush cleaner ever.
Yep.
And nobody who volunteers for Habitat ever wants to wash out their paintbrush, I'm telling you. So, it's finding ability, finding strength, resilience. You bring that up today, Paul, and get to know someone who makes less money than you, has fewer connections than you, lives in a sadder environment than you, and you will find resilience beyond belief. America has people, Wichita has people in grinding poverty. I'm saying grinding poverty because they have no hope, no light to get out of the financial circumstance they're in. But they are people who will work harder, love God more, be more faith-filled, and they just keep getting up in the morning. And I would be digging a hole in my backyard to go lay in it if I had to live the lives of some of the families that I have served because of all the challenges in their path, and yet their determination to make it through one more day.
That resilience to get around the barricade, whatever that day's barrier
or to face it,
Yeah.
to keep facing it.
Yeah.
Whether that's more children than I can feed, whether it's abuse from family, whether it's absolutely no example of a way to do things different. I think sometimes we can judge what we see without understanding why it's there. My little sister, she's 20 years younger, 18 and a half years younger than me. She was born the Christmas of my senior year in high school, so I never lived with her, so I never fought with her. That was kind of a good thing. And because of the other 6 of us, she got to be kind of a missionary, Dominican Republic. She ran a homeless shelter in San Francisco in the Tenderloin for years and years. And she's really where I learned to work with the poor, because she worked with the poorest of the poor. In San Francisco, incredible. You would try to walk 2 blocks and you would have 12 people wanting money, and it's like, Shelley, how do you handle this? I want to give, but how do I do it? And she said, the best gift you can give someone who's homeless is to ask them their name, ask for their story. So every day we'd buy 24 donuts. My children came with us one time, and we'd buy the donuts and we'd go sit on a corner and we'd have a donut with a homeless person and hear their story. And it's such a powerful experience to do that. I did also work at Newman for a little bit, and we used to have our students all go eat a meal at the Lord's Diner. And I would also challenge you to do that sometime, because when we're handing out, the food, and we're handing out the toys, and we're doing those things, it's very clear who is the giver and who's the receiver. But when you go to be a receiver, it will humble you in a way that's amazing. And that's one of the parts of Habitat I love. When you're on a job site, everybody's in their work clothes. You really can't tell who's the receiver. You can see everybody's working together, regardless of creed or gender or race or income or ability. One of my favorite stories was a man with 3 children who was building a house for himself and earning his sweat equity so he could buy this home for his family. And he was out on the job site hammering away, and we have 2 ceremonies. The day the walls go up, because it's such an important moment in this path toward home ownership, and then the day that the keys are given. And this was the days the wall were going up. And he was working on the job site and struck up this great conversation with a guy that was working out there too. When it came time for the ceremony, the guy he was talking to went to the podium. And it was Jay Smith, who's the president of Intrust Bank.
Oh, yeah.
And the homeowner all of a sudden freaked out because he'd been talking to a bank president, that's not someone he would ever talk to. Well, they had so much in common. And that relationship would have never happened had they been in their normal clothes, in their normal routine. So if I could challenge any of you, it would be go meet a resilient person. Meet somebody at a different wage scale. Meet them on their turf. That might be planting yourself in a different church some Sunday, but also, do you know your own congregants and who might be in a different circumstance than you? And your life will be so much richer And the power of relationship and just knowing someone's name and asking their story is an incredibly powerful gift to the world.
We've had quite a few people who've worked on your teams. I want to point out, Anne is wearing a beautiful necklace, and my assumption, it's gold. I just assumed it was a cross, but it's a hammer, and it's awesome.
It was my board member's gift to me as I retired from Habitat in the summer, and a powerful symbol for me.
Yeah.
Where we often
Christianity
break down people, but you can build people up too
Yeah.
by just knowing them, knowing about them.
And then, Jesus was a carpenter, so it works, so there you go. Right?
Yeah. And Habitat really is based in Christian principles of the hammer.
Yeah.
That don't usurp your neighbor who needs your help by charging them interest, loan them the money, help them, guide them, teach them.
And the tools that Habitat has in place are impressive to teach people who do not have the financial literacy, don't even probably know what a mortgage is, right?
Oh, right, that's for sure.
And how does
Or
that
don't understand. I think the financial education is probably one of the keystones to our success as an organization. It's helping people understand how to manage the money they do have. And the American culture really teaches you how to spend the money you don't have, doesn't it? And how to want the things that you don't need. So we really focus a lot on needs versus wants and managing a budget, establishing a budget, understanding the power of credit and the purpose of credit and the appropriate use of credit. Families save money in order to cover their closing costs, and so they become disciplined in saving even on a small income. And these are important life skills and tools, and we encourage the kids that are old enough to come to classes as well. Budget coaches are assigned. That's a great ministry to walk beside someone, to work within their means and live within their means. We teach them how to get their credit score a little better, although it takes a long time for a credit score to change, even if your behaviors change. Right. We teach them the components of the credit score. And the families buy their homes, about the 0% interest makes it affordable. So most people who enter the Habitat program are paying much less for housing than they did before, which allows them then to add in other areas of their life by going back to school or having enough food on the table of their own fruition, which is, again, another powerful piece.
Wonderful. So you've had about 10 acts in your life. What's your next act?
Currently, I'm on the Metropolitan Area Planning Commission. Oh boy, is that tough. We determine appropriate land uses in the community, and a land bank was something I was advocating for about the past 7 years. A land bank is simply a tool where underutilized properties can be put to a higher use. And my goal is that we would appropriate underutilized properties for affordable housing, because there's not enough. You probably don't know this, maybe you do, but 1 in 9 people in Sedgwick County pay more than 50% of their income on housing. So I want you to go back to your house and look at your pre-tax income and say, if I was spending half of that amount on housing, how would my life be different? And so, we're trying to get it to where people would only spend 30%, but land cost is a part of that. So I'm currently volunteering for the city of Wichita. I'm doing an inventory of the vacant buildable lots in the established central area, which is Ridge Road to Rock Road and 29th North to 37th South, and that's like 117 square miles, and I'm canvassing it to find buildable lots. So if you see me in my little white Ford, that's what I'm doing with my clipboard at the steering wheel. I may be dangerous.
So we are so grateful to have Anne with us this morning. Tell us a little bit about the resilience that she sees in the people that she works in, but also the resilience that we see in you and the work you've done. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.